During my high school, I was an average student. I went to class not expecting anything and just wanting to hang out with my friends and then go home. It was like this midlife crisis where it's like, is this what's life gonna be like type shit. The last year of my high school was around the time I rose to the top, but it was also the time of pandemic where all of my friends left me and I was basically left all alone. But because I kept at that momentum that I was making right now, I finished as one of the top students in my course after my first year just ended. And so here's how I went from that directionless student into one of the top students in my school. Okay, so the first thing is learning how to learn. This is basically what I did in order to get ahead of 90% of my classmates because most of them don't even know how to learn. They think it's this memorization technique that makes you remember it for longer, but it's actually just in learning the topic that keeps it in your brain. So basically, learning is just realization. You know that time when you were a kid and you're struggling in this one thing, and then your mom comes and then shows it to you and you're like, whoa, so that's how it works. Congratulations, you have learned. So instead of forcing myself to remember by doing active recall on basically all of the pages, I just focus on making myself realize what the topic was actually about. So here's how you do that. Alright, so this second thing is basically just what study technique to use. Basically, study techniques are just what makes the realization part easier and faster. So here are the two things that I use. Okay, so the first thing is active recall. Active recall is when you read the page and then you walk away for 5 minutes and then you come back and then you recite what you remember. So let's say you only remember 10% of the page. You read the page again and then you fill in what you're missing and then you walk away and then you come back and then you recite what you remember. You do this until you remember the whole page, basically. So basically it's just screenshotting a page into your memory. Here's how I improved active recall. So you basically only remember the main concepts of the page. Because for me, if you're making a presentation on a whole book, you won't put in the whole book, you'll summarize it and then you'll chop it down to slides, right? And so you'll only have to remember the main concepts of the page. You don't have to remember every details and nook of the corners of the page. No, just remember the main concepts. And so the more details that you memorize, the more detrimental it is for you, because the more likely it is for you to forget what you're trying to remember. So here's what I do. I pull up the textbook, and then textbooks have this table of contents, right? Where you have chapter 1, analytical psychology, and then you have subtopics in it. That's what you list, and that's what you remember. So what I do is I read the table of contents first, and the subtopics, and then that's what I memorize, because that's the most important things, basically. And so the second thing are mind maps. This is where you put your understanding into a picture, or you basically just draw mind maps. And so in mind maps, how you do this is you find connections on the subtopics that you just listed. So basically, these two study techniques work well together because you're doing active recall on the main concepts, and then the mind maps utilizes those main concepts. And in order to create a mind map, you have to find the connections within them. And so finding connections is just asking yourself, how does A connect to B, and then how does C connect to A, and then how does C and A connect to B. I sure do hope this makes sense. So basically, the main concept, like the chapter 1 that you're seeing, the very main topic in this example is abnormal psychology. And then there's subtopics like history, deciding abnormality, there's criterias, there's normality, and then there's psychopathology. And then you kind of have to connect all of these things. Like psychopathology is related with normality, because basically psychopathology is the treatment for normality, and then the criteria is basically related to deciding abnormality, because that's how you decide abnormality, and that's basically how you connect things. And so for these two study techniques, you do active recall on the main concepts of the page, and then you do mind maps in order to connect those main concepts together. And so that's how you remember it more. After you do this, you read the textbook and then you just fill in what's missing. You make it more specific as you go. You focus on the main concepts first, and then you add definition as you go about your way. Okay, so the third thing that I did to get ahead is immediate feedback. I just realized this recently and it really made my learning 10 times faster. This is what school does the worst. They give you homework which you won't know if you did it right until you pass it the next day. So basically you take this test, then you get the results, and then you move on to the next one. When you take the test and then you know your results immediately, that's how you get feedback, and then that's how you know when and what to improve. So here's how to get immediate feedback just by yourself. So basically, you can ask ChatGPT to make a test for you, and it's very, very helpful because you have control on what you get tested in. So if you're weak in this one part of the topic, you can ask ChatGPT to make a test about this one thing. What matters here the most is what prompt you give it. So if you want the test to be identification or multiple choice, then you put that in. You get to decide how specific you want to go. This is basically for those students who don't have any practice papers to test themselves from. I don't have that, and so I just thought, what if I made my own? And that's where I got it. The audio cut out again. I hate myself. And so an actionable thing that you can do is, let's say you're studying for like 2 hours a day, because that's what I do. You pull up the textbook or whatever resource you have on what you're studying, and you do active recall on the main concepts of that resource. So you skim on the things that are like on bold text, or you can just read the table of contents and do active recall on that. So you read it, and then you walk away, you think about it, and make sure you understand what it means, of course. And then you come back and then you recite what you remember. In this stage, you can already find possible connections on those main concepts alone. And so you can create a temporary mind map just based on how you think those concepts connect together. After you create a mind map, you can start reading definitions and make yourself realize that, oh, these two don't connect together. Like, oh, this concept connected this and also this concept. And you keep doing this until you've gone through all of what you have to study. And so now your mind map becomes a solid foundation. After that, you test yourself. Mock exams are really, really helpful because it recreates that feeling of the exam day over and over and over again. So you just keep testing yourself over and over and over again in different ways, so that when the exam day comes, it's easier for you to do because you've just done it multiple times. And so these are the 3 things that I did in order to get from an average directionless student into a top level student. And honestly, I am not stopping because I can still see things that I can improve. And yeah, those are just the 3 things. So do me a favor, live. The wire's stuck in my freaking hand, but yeah, don't worry about that.